Hi and welcome to another Bible teaching video. Today I want to look at chapter 1 of the story of Esther. So let's get right into it. The thing I want to focus on is something called advice, the importance of giving advice, receiving advice. But let's start with the story, Esther. It begins with King Xerxes, who was a Persian king, lived 400 so years before Christ. Decided, and he was just 3 years into his reign, he decided to have an enormous banquet party lasting 100 and odd days, 180 days, and then culminating in the last week, the week after that 180 days, he had in his special kind of garden, palace garden, which is described in detail, quite an amazing place. And it was for all of the leaders, the officials from all over his kingdom, his court, and the purpose of this great banquet was to display his power, his authority, his wealth. And this was all for men, because obviously in those days, it was only men, or at least in this situation, who had positions of management, leadership, etc. So it was all men. At the same time as this, Queen Vashti, the main queen, or the main wife of King Xerxes, she decided to have a party as well. So she was having a party. So while this week-long party was happening, we're told in the scripture that there was plenty of alcohol, they were drunk, King Xerxes was drunk, and he decided to command one of his most faithful advisors to call Queen Vashti from her party to come to his big party and to show everyone how beautiful she is, how elegant, how beautiful she is. But Queen Vashti refused. She refused the command of King Xerxes. And obviously, particularly in that culture, not so much has changed, but particularly in that culture, that was a great humiliation. So King Xerxes did something which was really important, and which what we have to do in our personal lives, but especially in the lives of churches, in church leadership situations with elders, pastors, and that is to take advice. What should King Xerxes do about this awful humiliation, this situation? So he calls his advisors, and one of the chief advisors is a man called Mehuman. So he calls him and the others to take advice, and he says to them basically, what are we going to do? And his advisors say to him, well, you must consult the royal decrees. So he consults the royal decrees. In other words, Xerxes follows procedure. There are things written in their laws as to what they should do in certain situations. So one of the other good things that King Xerxes does is he follows decrees. He follows what's already laid down. The consequences. One of the great things about the advisors, what they say to him, they say, look, this has happened, but let's just look a bit further ahead. The consequences of this are a lot more serious than just, it's bad enough for you, king, to be humiliated in front of all of your guests. That was really significant. But they said to him, the consequences of this, of course, are going to be that husbands of wives and wives of officials all over the empire, Queen Vashti is now going to be looked upon, given half an opportunity by women, wives, as an example of what they can do. If it's happened with the top queen to the top king, then that sets a terrible example. So they give the king advice. And the advice is, let's read it in verse 15. According to the royal decrees, what must we do with Queen Vashti, since she did not obey King Xerxes' command, which the eunuchs delivered? Verse 16, then Memucan spoke up in the presence of the king and the officials. So I'll just focus on this man, Memucan. He's one of the chief advisors to the king, and he's someone who I want us to see as an example of a good advisor. And this is relevant throughout the whole of history, but it's relevant today. There are many dilemmas, many things that happen in church life, in situations where we as Christians, you know, we're not supposed to deal with big issues by ourselves, you know, and that's where we need friends, counsellors, advisors. In fact, one of the Proverbs, 15 verse 22, says this. Let's turn to the Proverbs. There are a few different Proverbs that talk about this kind of thing, so I've just chosen one. Proverbs 15 and verse 22, it says this. Without advice, plans go wrong, but with many advisors, they succeed. Okay, so taking advice, being open to advice and giving advice is really, really important. Memucan gives the king his advice, and as I just briefly mentioned earlier, his advice was summarised in verse 17. Memucan says to the king, the news of what the queen has done will spread to all women, and they will despise their husbands. They will say, King Xerxes ordered Queen Vashti to be brought to him, but she would not come. And he continues. And then Memucan moves on, not just to give advice, but to give to recommend a solution. And he's got great foresight because he can see something of the future. And knowing what the consequences are likely to be, you know, is really important because, you know, it's not just the current consequences, but consequences, if they're big issues, they have usually have big ripple effects. So Memucan, he goes on to recommend action. Verse 19, he's speaking to the king. If it pleases you, your majesty, issue a royal decree. It should be recorded in the decrees of the Persians and Medes, never to be repealed, that Vashti may never again appear in front of King Xerxes. And then he goes on at the end of verse 20, then all the wives will honour their husbands regardless of their station. So one of the great things we can learn from chapter 1 of Esther is the importance of consciously gathering around you people that you know are going to be honest and are going to give you good advice. Of course, we all know from the situations we see almost every day, big media celebrities, you know, classic Michael Jackson. Invariably, if they're not wise, which obviously he wasn't, they surround themselves with yes people, and they just end up spiraling into unreality and their lives disintegrate. So it's really important to gather around us, even with our wives, or husband with their wives, a wife to receive advice from a husband, vice versa, submit to one another as scripture says, to receive advice, to be open to advice, and as an advisor, not just to say the consequences, what might happen, but to give solutions, as Memucan did. So there are some other lessons there, but we might come on to those in the future. So for now, may God bless you.